This is Building the Future, How State Actions Support Local Efforts for a Sustainable Built Environment. For everyone who's local here, hello, it's nice to see you. For those who've traveled, we're thrilled to have you here in the beautiful Twin Cities. I've got just a couple announcements. We do have a restroom on this floor. You're gonna exit this room, take a left, take another left, follow that hallway down and you'll find them. We do have a happy hour after this as well that is at capacity, so we are looking to find a second location for that. So stay tuned to the Hoopa app for more details. All right, and I'm going to pass things off to our panelists. We have 5 representatives from 5 different states to talk about what they're doing to support local policy development for building material related things. So.
Let's see if this works. Yes, it does. So I guess I'll start. I'm Kathy Mercer, and I'm the branch chief for the Municipal Waste Reduction Programs for Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection. I'm super excited to be here today and have Massachusetts represented. I think there might be a few other folks out there that are as well. I guess we should give a little bit more depth to our intros, right? Like what, kind of where we're coming from. In Massachusetts, we have a reduce and reuse action plan, and building materials are a target material for reuse. So the last couple of years, I've been working with my team to build up a deconstruction network of sorts. And we have a lot to learn, but I think we're spreading some seeds and getting some feedback there. And I think there's some great opportunities coming forward. So I'll pass it from here.
Hi, I'm Gretchen Worth, and I am representing New York State.
Yay, New York State!
And I work for a community nonprofit that does statewide work focused on the built environment and climate resiliency and equity, the Christopherson Center. And the Christopherson Center, along with a number of my colleagues here today from New York State, is a founding partner of a statewide collaborative network called CRAB, which stands for Circularity, Reuse, and Zero Waste Development. And so CRAB is working to create and advance the circular construction economy in New York State with a lot of different partners and collaborators, some of which you'll hear about throughout this presentation. But really happy to be here with all of these women who I have called on numerous times from my place in New York State to hear about how they've been dealing with similar issues and challenges and opportunities in their state. So I'm really happy to be here with everyone else.
Hi, folks. If you don't know me yet, I am Melissa Wenzel. I work at the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. Shout out to Minnesotans here. We've been advocating for sustainability in the built environment for the last 6 years. So I'm the first person who has had a role, a full-time role, for that particular opportunity here in Minnesota. I don't take that lightly because I don't think there's other states that have such a full dedicated position like that, but I also want to work with others and help others, learn from them and so on. So, that's sort of the usual thing with all of us is that we have relied on each other, helped each other, asked each other questions, and have done that to others across the nation too. So I believe very strongly in that to the point that, Minnesota's hosting this conference this year, and I'm glad to have my fellow speakers here on the stage with me today.
Hi, I'm Nicole Ty from California. Is there anyone from California in the room? 2, okay, 3. So if I talk shit about California, you won't say anything, right? So I'm representing California. I'm not a state representative. I am a owner. My company is Grain Lakes Deconstruction, and we have a reuse facility in Santa Rosa, California. But I started the Bay Area Deconstruction Work Group with Timothy Hood of the EPA. We affectionately call it Bad Dog. And we started that in 2017 after being inspired by Sean Wood and Portland and all the amazing things that were happening there. We need to do something. The goal of Bad Dog originally was to create a regional ordinance for deconstruction. We didn't quite succeed in that regard, although we do have an ordinance. I'll talk about those. But so that's my role. Also representing Reefs Alliance, which is a reefs association based in Santa Rosa, California, and in August, or, yeah, end of August. Very exciting.
I'm Megan Mansfield Pryor. I work for the State of Maine Governor's Office of Policy, Innovation, and the Future. It's a very long title. Climate policy, I'm part of the climate team there, and I'm very excited that we have deconstruction officially in our climate action plan now, which is something that was a long time coming, and it was a long process. I was brought on to GoPIF to bring waste and materials into our climate plan. I used to work at the Department of Environmental Protection in Maine on sustainable materials management, so this is a topic that has been brewing and generating interest for a long time, but I'm really hoping that having it officially in our climate plan is going to really kickstart the work and the conversation. And I also want to give a shout out to our co-presenter who couldn't be here, Danny Solomon, who just opened a new small mission-based deconstruction business in Maine. It's the first one. And he's doing amazing work. He took on 14 interns over the course of the summer and he's just mentoring so many young people. He came from being a high school teacher to start this deconstruction business, and I have great hope that between the climate plan and what he's doing, we'll see a lot more action happening in Maine, and I'm very excited to be here. Thank you.
So we have, when we were brainstorming our presentation, we have a lot of different topics that multiple ones of us can speak to. And so because our time is short and we want to leave room for questions, we thought we could cover 3 topics, about 10 to 12 minutes each. And so there was a poll in Whova, but there's more of you here who answered the poll. So by a quick show of hands, these are the various topics that some of us, all of us can speak to. And we'd really just like for you to kind of tell us what you'd like to hear about. So I think I'm going to just go by the fact that funding incentives and state level policy and legislation were the 2 high ones on the poll. But for the rest down, landfill bans, important collaborators, tools, actions, and initiatives, and procurement and dispossession. I'm just going to go through them and raise your hand if you would like to hear about that, and then we'll just kind of figure that out. Landfill bans and diversion requirements. Ooh, okay, you're going to be good. Important collaborators. Okay. Oh, okay. Well, you only got 1 vote. What?
We only have time for 1 more, so you can almost pick.
Tools, actions, and initiatives. Okay, and procurement and dispossession. Okay, so I think we're gonna go with landfill ban.
Well, we should redo it again if they thought that they could go to that one and others. So.
Why don't we we'll just jump in and we'll go back.
Fair.
Okay, all right. So funding incentives, so we're just gonna talk about funding incentives for 10 minutes or so, and then we'll move on to policy, then we'll hit the landfill bans, and then we'll see what else we can get, and there's time for questions at the end. Do you guys want to start over there? Funding incentives for your state?
Yeah, sure. So we have 2 different state grant programs that can support deconstruction work. One of them is with our Department of Environmental Protection. It's a waste diversion grant. It's a pretty small grant pool. It's only about $200,000 a year, and they do 2 rounds with about $100,000 of funding each round. The amount that's available kind of fluctuates. It's funded through permitting and fees, so sometimes there's a little more money in the pot, sometimes there's a little less. And it's open to both public and private entities, so it's a little more flexible in that really anyone can apply. And it can fund hard goods to equipment, as well as training, education, and outreach. Pretty much, if you can think of it, and it's going to help fund diversion of materials, including construction debris, it's eligible for funding under that program. The one caveat is that in statute, it's focused, it gives an advantage to organics and food waste. So one of those rounds that they do per year is typically focused more on food waste. So the construction and demolition debris diversion is really only eligible for 1 round per year. The other grant round is an exciting and new one. It's part of our community action grants, which are part of the Community Resilience Partnership Program, which is run through our new Maine Office of Community Affairs. And that one has quite a bit more funding this year due to federal funding that we got to hold on to. It probably won't be back, but we are working on trying to find a way to keep it permanently funded. This grant is for communities only, but it has almost $5 million available for this grant round this year, as well as $600,000 available for the regional service providers. Maine is a really rural state, so we fund regional planning commissions and organizations that help communities within their region with planning projects and implementation. And that grant project, the grant eligibility list was updated and aligned with our climate action plan. So that's now deconstruction is considered an eligible item. Anything that's going to help build the circular economy is eligible under that grant program now, because it is meant to help communities come into alignment with our climate action plan. That's all we have for me.
So California has one remaining program, and it's actually a loan program from our greenhouse gas law that passed away. And so that is a program that's generally for anything recycling related, but reuse falls under it. So it's kind of a, you have to just be careful how you word it and get in touch with them in advance. Because a lot of the wording is specifically for recycling, and so, but they're totally aware of reuse, and deconstruction is mainly for diversion. So you have to have diversion numbers that you're to reach, and your plan, and it's a little tricky because you have to have money to get money, or you have to have a property that you want to buy to serve as an asset, or you have to, leverage one of your children or homes. So it ranges from about 500,000 to, I think kind of the sky's the limit, but it's generally around 10 million is around max. And we're actually going after it this year with small businesses, so we'll see how that works. Small children be leveraged. And so we had a reuse grant. I think it became defunct. It was a pilot program, 2 million, and there were 4 grants that were given out. One was for a habitat lumberyard and lumber diversion program. And that was around 2018, but it is defunct right now. Maybe they will bring it back. We're working on our climate action plan for the state, and so we're doing a lot of advocacy to try to get deconstruction and reuse in the climate action plan. The outside entity, very large, a national corporation that's doing our climate action plan, so that'll be an interesting. So there's also a couple other mechanisms that are also defunct. We have a glass and fiber reuse recycling grant program, and that comes in and out of every year, whether it gets funded or not. We're kind of in a down year, right? This year's we don't have a lot of money coming out that funding for it. It could change next year. That's the glass, fiber, and I think plastics.
Here in Minnesota, we received one-time funding of $2 million to enhance a more sustainable built environment. And we had a pretty rich, really robust legislative session with a record surplus. So we're not seeing those opportunities like that. I'm certainly going to be requesting funding in future years, but we may not get it. That being said, we routinely have recycling and reuse, particularly outside of the metro area, grant funding for those opportunities. And a lot of those can overlap with a more sustainable built environment.
In New York State, the funding, which is most directly related to deconstruction and circular construction economy, comes from there are currently 2 agencies or authorities where there is funding available or will be available. So our infrastructure authority, Empire State Development, Economic Development Infrastructure, has a huge annual grant program called Restore New York. And when we first started to engage with Empire State Development a few years ago, they put into their grant opportunity language around deconstruction, material diversion, reuse, about it would be really nice if you won this grant, we would consider doing it. But it wasn't a requirement. But since then, they have now inserted this language as part of the point scoring system. So this is a $60 million pool total. It gets awarded to local governments based on their population for infrastructure improvements. So anywhere from $2 to $4 million to a local community. And if you now, when you're filling out your grant application, pledge to do any of these actions related to circular construction economy, obviously you're boosting your total score to potentially be awarded a grant. The other funder in our state is the Department of Environmental Conservation. And so traditionally, they've passed on to something called the Pollution Prevention Institute, P2I, a bit of money. And so you can get $10,000 to $20,000 in a grant cycle for something that helps prevent pollution. And I know that a number of our proud colleagues, including my organization, have gotten P2I money for very specific projects that we're working on. And there's a deadline, there's a timeline, a year. But what we're very excited about, and what our DEC is very excited about, is a new grant program, which will come into effect in about a year, in later 2026. And so out of an existing program, the Municipal Waste Reduction and Recycling Grant, New York has funds a lot of recycling, but they have carved out of that pool $2 million that will now go specifically toward reuse activities. And it's not just building material, it's reuse writ large, but there's a $2 million carve out of this grant program. And it's for local governments, but they've also kind of through conversations with us being proud and my colleagues, they've also extended the eligibility to community nonprofits. And so this is for reuse activities. So whether it's helping you open a reuse facility, a tool library, training, buying equipment. So this will go into effect next year. In New York State, we have a lot of community organizations that are currently working to open building material reuse facilities. And so this is going to be really valuable to them, hopefully, a year from now when this grant comes into effect. So those at the moment are our most directly related to circular construction. In Massachusetts, we break up our grants primarily between our commercial sector grants, which are really about market development and building infrastructure to be able to manage materials, and then grants to municipalities, to the cities and towns. And so for the commercial sector grants, which can include nonprofits, the way we categorize it, we have reuse and recycling business development grants. Reuse was added a couple of years ago to some existing recycling business development grants. And again, we invite companies and organizations to come in related to reuse. And C&D materials and bulky items are really targeted materials. So sometimes we change the certain materials that we're looking for as eligible for that particular year. Those grants total about $2 million a year, and the awards are between $50,000 and $400,000. So there's a certain number of grants that go out. A new grant that just came live this year and just had a closing date a few weeks ago was a waste reduction innovation grant, which the state allotted $6 million toward. And that's certainly C&D materials are an eligible material to go after under that innovations grant. And the state's looking for much larger substantial grants with that. So they have it in two categories, of one being startups and pilots with a certain amount of matching funds, and then also more innovative, what they're calling innovative capital investments. So a process that's already been tried and true that needs some additional funding to really expand substantially. We really want to change the way we manage these materials in Massachusetts. They really are a big problem. They're a burden. They're 30% of our waste stream, and we really need to do a lot better managing them. And we also have small reuse and repair micro grants. I call them small because they're up to $10,000, but we've done it for about 4 years now, I guess it is. And it's so fascinating to see the enthusiasm around the micro grants. We had almost 100 applications this last cycle, and it's all sorts of reuse. It's not necessarily just C&D related, but one of them had to do with deconstruction, maybe more than one, but certainly a few. And it's really terrific to see some of those early project starts. and provide them with that kind of funding. And it's become very competitive even for those small grants. And then on the municipal side, which is where my team works, we have a few different grant programs for the cities and towns. And it's more about capturing these materials in a cost-effective way, getting them to the market, and incentivizing the kind of program development that will really move the needle. Because Massachusetts is a commonwealth. We have 351 cities and towns that each do it their own way. So our work is really cut out for us to enable that and incentivize it. So for the municipal grants, we have an annual cycle. We incentivize things related to reuse, things like a materials management plan for the building materials, an assessment being done, pilot deconstruction projects. Now, these are things they don't have to do, but if they choose to do it, they get credits like points, and these points have a dollar value associated with it. So we try to incentivize. And we have about 300 out of 351 communities that participate in those grants, and they use that as the catalyst and sort of the best practices guidebook to move them forward, and then we try to put some money behind it. Last but not least, we also have a reuse and recycling loan fund, which is a very low-cost fund for businesses and coming into the state and nonprofits in the reuse and recycling space.
Had a couple more things that I thought of. Number one, I need to I misspoke. And when I said we're doing a climate action plan, we're doing a zero waste plan. And so we also have the recycling market development zones throughout California, and we have an administrator, and it's usually the head of our JPAs, which is Joint Powers Authority. Their Joint Powers Authority usually has like a waste management board, and they're kind of like a quasi-governmental county organization where all the members are the different cities, and someone probably from the county board of supervisors. But they usually have about $10,000 in money that they can play with, and depending on the administrator, could do something fun with it. It's not a lot of money, but it's something. And then sometimes, and that's kind of where all those other funds, usually you get funding through your administrator. You start with your administrator of your market development zone, and they'll kind of get you up to the next level of the state. Kind of interesting. And then on the municipal level, they also have the JPAs have each individual JPA gets an annual budget, and so depending on who's on the JPA, you might have someone who's pretty heavy reuse advocate. We just had 3 different JPAs decide that they want to have reuse and repair fairs, not related to deconstruction or building materials reuse, but seems like we're kind of on a trajectory to start changing things municipal level. So funding mechanisms, other funding mechanisms.
So here in Minnesota, we don't have as much ongoing funding directly related to the activities others were talking about. We do focus on supporting diversion reuse programs as well as deconstruction training, which you'll hear about a little bit later at the members meeting if you join us this afternoon. But as far as legislation goes, we actually are having a very strict requirement for our unlined landfills. We are actually one of the states in the area that does still allow, there's a huge history I will not get into right now about that. But we're going through rulemaking to require every single landfill that accepts construction demolition materials to be lined. So that means a bunch will close and cap in place to protect the environment, or new ones will be created with liners. We do have a lot of lined landfills. So we know that's going to cost money to the consumer, to the person who has something to throw away. So we've been trying to go upstream to create policy or to encourage. We have a lot of encouragement going on here in Minnesota. And it's working. You know, people respond to that. A lot of times people are like, you should regulate this or that. And I'm like, yeah, that's really difficult. There's a lot of people who say, don't ever regulate this or that. So kind of in the middle place right now is building some momentum at the local level. We have been focusing a lot on Some of the initiatives that already exist within our state system. We have a program called the Green Steps Cities Program, where cities can voluntarily enroll into this program, where they can go and tackle a bunch of different sustainability issues, including the sustainable built environment. We have an AmeriCorps program called Green Corps, where host sites, there's a few folks in the room that are connected to that, where host sites and service members are helping to achieve a more sustainable built environment. And so those are the kind of examples where, okay, we may not have a materials ban, or we may not have ongoing funding directly related to sustainable built environment initiatives, but we have a lot of supporting roles. Very first time ever, we have a RETAP member, a retiree environmental technical assistance program. So people who've been in the field and retired, we have our very first RETAP, the sustainable built environment consultant. And so things like that, where we tend to fund, our agency tends to fund that, it has been making some really good strides in being able to help the situation better.
In Maine, we also do not have a landfill ban. The only landfill bans we have tend to be for toxic materials like e-waste or mercury-containing products. But we do have requirements for waste processing facilities. So a solid waste processing facility, of which construction and demolition debris processing facility would obviously qualify, has to meet certain, technically they have to recycle 50% of what they take in. There's a lot of fluidity with what counts as recycling currently. So grinding up materials and sending them as daily cover, for example, at a landfill would count as recycling under this 50% requirement. But there was a law passed a couple of years ago in the legislature that kind of tightened that up over time. And then there was a bill this past legislative session that knocked it down a little bit farther. But essentially, these processing facilities are going to have to begin doing better with keeping materials out of the landfill, so that daily cover amount is not going to count for them as recycling up to a certain threshold. So they have to be above 15% out of the landfill. And I want to say the date that it got knocked to was 2030 for that, and then it progresses each year. So within 10 years, they'll have to meet a true 50% diversion out of landfill, which I hope is going to be a really good incentive for finding other ways to use the material, because if you can't just grind it up and use it as daily cover, then you're going to have to think about other things. And I've already heard that we really only have one big processing facility in Maine. I've already heard that they're working on equipment and technology improvements so that they can recover more material in a better sense than just grinding it up. And that's all we have for Maine.
Well, it's interesting because it sounds like your performance standards in Maine are further along than ours in Massachusetts. So it's a little bit of we've got a number of different things going on in Massachusetts related to policy and legislation. Not always directly connected, I guess you could say. I mean, they are, but you'll see why. So we have waste disposal bans that some of you may have heard of before. The earliest bans were probably 35 years ago, and over time, different materials basically have been prohibited from disposal in landfills and waste combustors in Massachusetts. We do combust most of our waste in Massachusetts, more than 50%. A certain percentage gets landfilled, and then unfortunately, a substantial amount actually goes out of state on rail. It's close to 40% now. Which is embarrassing to have to admit, but that is the reality. So much is going out of state because we have a capacity issue. And that's one of the reasons we have these bans, is because we also want to be able to capture the high value materials, which will release more of the disposal capacity in our state, because we're not capturing everything of high value. A lot is still being disposed of as trash. So the waste disposal bans include everything from paper, cardboard, bottles, and cans to a number of different building materials to some high hazard materials. And also organics and food waste to a certain, depending on how much generated at a certain facility. So that's one piece of it. We have these disposal bans, but when it comes to C&D processing and what Megan just mentioned about Maine, we have a person on staff who's in charge of our C&D point person, and they have performance standards for the C&D processing facilities in Massachusetts, but the standards are not as high as what you just described for Maine. And while there is improvement, and there has been over the last few years, there's still so much more room for improvement. And that's really for them to be able to capture what comes in and direct it toward recycling, not even reuse per se. That's really just about the separation piece. And separately, I also mentioned that I work on the state's Reduce and Reuse Action Plan, which is part of the state's larger solid waste master plan. And it's the first time Massachusetts ever put their kind of toe in the water on reuse in a very concerted way by making it part of the state plan that was released in 2021. As I mentioned, building materials are part of that. The deconstruction work group that I lead with my team is a part of that. And it's all about education. It's about creating networks. It's casting that net very widely with all stakeholders who would be doing any kind of work in this ecosystem in the state. So we're learning. I think there's a lot of interest that's really burgeoning in this space, and that's part of why our grants are starting to evolve to incorporate more of these reuse opportunities and to actually invite in more businesses and nonprofits that do that kind of work to enable more of that separation. Last but not least, the climate bill that was released in Massachusetts in late 2024. It's a pretty expansive climate bill. But what it includes, I was really happy, there's one sentence that mentioned deconstruction and reuse. But I don't know if anyone here is involved in it, but they formed an embodied carbon intergovernmental coordinating council. I had to look down because it's quite a mouthful. But we have a state climate chief. It was a new position that was developed about 3 or 4 years ago with the governor we have now. So we have a climate chief for the state. She leads this council, and she knows her stuff, because I saw it was at a presentation recently, and I was so impressed with her knowledge and understanding about embodied carbon and all types of materials. And she's doing this in concert with the state agency that oversees all of the state-owned buildings in Massachusetts. So they're leading this embodied carbon council. And a couple things that they have to do. Their charge is to develop an embodied carbon reduction plan by January 26th. They're going to be looking at environmental product declarations for any purchasing in state, because the state agencies are required to purchase through one mechanism. To, let's see, integrate reduction of embodied carbon into the state building code, to look at that. And last but not least, to explore best practices to incentivize reuse of building materials and decrease demolition in favor of deconstruction. So, got my fingers crossed that some of these early actions will keep moving us in the right direction. So in New York State, unlike in Minnesota, we are legislating because our next requests have only gotten so far. So in New York State, we're taking a strategic approach and working both from the top down at the state level with regard to policy, but also from the bottom up with local governments. And so at the state level, we and again, being CROWD, this collaborative network, work really closely with one of our with a number of our elected officials, but an assemblywoman and a state senator who this year in the state legislature introduced 3 bills directly related to circular construction, and then there were 2 additional bills introduced, and I can go through what those are. But the idea being at the state level to lead with the economic piece of circular construction. So all of these policies, bills that are being introduced are coming from a point of view of we need to support a marketplace. And so we have worked very closely with them in terms of drafting legislation, in terms of providing resources. We've sent them to talk to some people like Melissa, maybe Kathy. And so really trying to support these efforts to introduce and pass the state policy. At the local level, we tried for a number of years to get someone in New York State to pass a deconstruction ordinance and saw no joy. So we have taken a slightly different approach, which is to support local governments to pass non-binding deconstruction resolutions. And so it's a very simple one-page template where they're just simply pledging to support deconstruction in the circular construction economy. And the idea being a few different things. Right now, so we now have 3 local governments, 2 municipalities and a county that have passed non-binding resolutions. They are the only ones in the state, but we are working with 6 to 8 other communities currently to pass non-binding resolutions. And once there's a few more local governments and we have a critical mass, then we will be working with them through a technical assistance program based on what their particular needs might be. So maybe it's permitting, data collection, funding opportunities, reuse infrastructure, but bringing them all together collectively to offer technical assistance and to really create momentum around local government work in this area. This is also supporting the work at the state level because the assemblywoman who we work very closely with really wants to know, what's the temperature among local governments and what's their appetite for taking this on, that she can then go back to her colleagues in the state assembly and say, we've got X number of local governments who have already pledged to support the work that we're doing at the state, and so let's move this forward. So we're really hoping that the twain shall meet on this particular strategy, but it seems like there's momentum building. I'll just really quickly go through the five bills, because you'll see that they are trying to create this marketplace. One is to establish standards for the reuse of lumber in new structural builds. The second is a multi-part bill that requires any local government that has won for specific state grant funding for infrastructure to adopt an ordinance, as well as there's some reporting requirements involved. The second part of that bill is funding technical assistance for the community. So there are budget implications in this. And then the third part of this is to establish requirements for a deconstruction contractor certification. The third bill, it has to do with new construction, and it's really about reducing carbon emissions, both with the buildings, but also with the building materials. It's a little bit vague. The fourth one is the Sustainable Building Materials Act, which would offer a tax exemption for a purchase of low carbon building materials. And then there's a grant program for concrete manufacturers to initiate PPP. And then the final one is to require state agencies to adopt decarbonization programs specifically around the common construction materials that they themselves are purchasing. So those are the 5 bills. Interestingly, the lumber reuse bill was passed unanimously in the state Senate, but it didn't make it very far in the assembly. So all these bills will be renumbered and put back into the next legislative session that starts in January, and there will probably be additional bills introduced again to create this marketplace. So there's a lot of work happening at our state level with regard to policy, and we're trying to meet that with all of the local governments that we're working with right now.
I just wanted to add that I just messaged Gretchen, so you have an alert on your phone. You know who I asked that I'd like to learn more about some of these initiatives. So we're learning from one another right here. So it's going to be good.
Me too, I want that number one. Okay, so California has, as you all know, we've had some serious fires lately. And so a lot has changed since we decided to do this panel and today. So our law that still stands, 8939, was originally 50% diversion of everything. C&D, whatever, you name it, that was 1989. And it has evolved, so that is under our state agency, which is Cal EPA, and we have an agency called Cal Recycle under that. So Cal Recycle passed that particular, the C&D off to our state building code, and now we have what's called Cal Green underneath our state building code. And there's one guy at Cal Recycle that sets that rate, after consulting with what I've discovered is just a bunch of random people. Me being one of them. And he's like, what are we gonna do, Nicole? And I'm like, okay. So we set that at 65% for C and D for the entire state. And it is a tonnage-based diversion rate. And so as you can imagine, that is mostly gonna be fulfilled with concrete. So lumber and all the other wood products that come out of our buildings and residential deconstruction could easily just fall through the wayside because the majority of foundation wood covers. So it's also kind of strange, it's geared towards the actual project, but in practice, it's actually the transfer station. So a lot of the transfer stations are certified 65%. And so not a lot of deconstruction is incentivized using the C&D rate. There are some cities that have bumped it up to 75% and also added some reuse components, added requirements, incentives off of, time incentives, meaning they get extra time on their permits. And then we have our Palo Alto ordinance, which is a deconstruction ordinance and is required, and it's changing over time in terms of the level of the job type that has to do deconstruction. That's going fairly well. It's an interesting one to watch, what to do, what not to do. So it's still in process, but it was a big problem because Palo Alto, they were tearing down homes because the value in Palo Alto is so extremely high. So it was really urgent, kind of similar to what was going on in Portland. So we also have Sonoma passed an ordinance at the JPA level, still has not passed at the county level yet. And that one is a interesting ordinance where you essentially pull a deconstruction permit, and you can only pull a deconstruction permit in advance. If you want to pull a demolition permit, it has to be at the time you get the permit. So if you're a contractor, you know, ooh, okay, that could be a year that you get to deconstruct, but not demolish. Because jobs take that long sometimes to get permitted in California. So that being said, after the Altadena and LA fires, the state put forth a bill called AB 130, and so that bill has a lot of components to it, but essentially what it does is it freezes our building code, and I'm getting the chills actually, freezes our building code to, sorry, I didn't think I would get emotional, 2031. And so for 6 years now, we will not have any changes to our building code. We have until October at the municipal level to change the code. If we want to do any REACH codes, and that usually is EVs or any kind of solar related stuff. Deconstruction I haven't even had a chance to check in with San Francisco and Oakland and a few others that are working on their own deconstruction codes. But whether they are going at the code level or not, they're still working on it. And so all of that being said, it actually presents an interesting opportunity in California because we have 6 years where we can't do anything with the code, and CalRecycle has already told us in no uncertain terms, we are not touching C&D because it's under Cal Green. So for 6 years now, we can't do anything to change our code. So maybe that's an opportunity for some discussion at the state level with CalRecycle to say, hey, we can't do anything for 6 years. Maybe we can do something at the CalRecycle level to make some changes. So we have another, sorry, all the lingo, but SB 1383 is an organics, essentially banned at 75%. And lumber is actually included in that. And they also had punted that over to Cal Green. So We had a code advisory group that was working to change the code. There's actually a carve out in the code for deconstruction, building material reuse, but it just says open or pending. There's nothing, there's no language. So, so stay tuned. Not sure what we're gonna do next, but this change to our state code is massive. And for good reason, we lost 12,000 homes. And then we lost a similar amount in 2017 in Santa Rosa where I am. So lots of changes going on in California. So, lots of opportunity there.
Going to talk about our climate plan. So I had mentioned that we now have deconstruction in our climate action plan. And I just wanted to go into detail a little bit more about that and about our lead by example work. So we are part of the US Climate Alliance. And that's a group of, I believe it's 26 states that are made a commitment after the 2016 election to stay strong on climate action and not let what's happening at the federal level slow us down. So we have, as part of that work, we're part of the Buy Clean work that they are leading to buy lower embodied carbon material. A lot of the focus is mostly on concrete, but that's kind of set the stage for us in our climate action plan to refer back to that as our, kind of our goalpost that we want to buy low embodied carbon materials. So we now have a recommendation in our climate plan for all state funded construction projects. And while it's not specified, construction projects that meet a certain carbon threshold to be designed for deconstruction and reuse from low embodied carbon materials by 2030. So that's a big one. It's ambitious. We're going to have a lot of work to do if we want to actually get there. It is a recommendation. It's not, it's not set in stone. It's not something we have to do, but it's something that we want to try working toward. And the other recommendation in our climate plan is targeted toward municipalities. So we wanted to have a delay on demolition projects, but unfortunately, if we had known a bit more, we probably would have had the delay out farther. In the climate plan, it only recommends a 2-week delay, which we learned after was just not nearly enough time to really provide incentive, but also to encourage municipalities to pass their own ordinances to further deconstruction around the state rather than having something passed at the state level. And as part of that work, I was able to start just to further these recommendations, I was able to start the Maine Deconstruction Network, which is still quite small, but is hopefully going to keep growing. We have good representation already from historic preservation, from municipal and state government agencies, small deconstruction business, the one that I mentioned, which we finally have in Maine. So we're meeting monthly and inviting guest speakers like Kathy. I'm sure I'll be hitting the rest of you up at some point. Michael Urbank. So we're trying to really raise awareness right now and get more people aware that these recommendations are in our climate plan and that we need to start working toward them. So hopefully we'll make some progress on that by 2030.
So we're going to be here for 3 more hours to cover all the content of 13 minutes. So we're going to go straight into questions, and we know that you'll probably have more. Unfortunately, we do have the members meeting, so we don't have much time to chat afterwards, but we're going to be here all week. So we're going to open it up to questions now, please.
Thank you all. Since I'm not from the Maine, California, Minnesota, New York, or Massachusetts, for those of us who aren't, are there things that have worked particularly well? And please share those with me, with us, not by code numbers and so forth, but by conceptual, simple language, if you would. What worked, what came what? Because that would be helpful, because we've heard a lot of different policies and incentives and so forth. Well, what's really working?
In New York State, I would say the collaboration is really working. Yeah. And so I think CRAB that I'm part of was really modeled after Bay Area Deconstruction Work Group and Timony and Nicole. And that has been a great thing, and it has provided us the opportunity. We started in Central New York. We now have people joining our CRAB network, and we do weekly calls. But we have people now from every single region of New York State. It's kind of exploded. And because we have all of these different people bringing all these different skills and all these different viewpoints, it's also really increased our network and our ability to outreach. And so, we are working directly with our state level elected officials, and that's how we're going to get policy passed. We have so many different people working locally and the local communities, but then also it's given us an opportunity to really engage, I would say, meaningfully with numerous state agencies and authorities. And so what was unbeknownst to many of us, and I say this to myself, maybe everybody knew, was that in New York State, even though it might seem like there's not a lot of stuff getting done outside of our Department of Environmental Conservation, in fact, every single agency has somebody working on some piece of the circular construction economy, and people you wouldn't even think of. So, as I mentioned, our Economic Development Authority, our Office of General Services, our state university system, which owns 40% of the publicly owned building stock in the state, our Department of State, our Department of Labor. And so being able to find these people in these different agencies through this vast network that CRAB has created has just been so transformative, really. And so one of our goals for the fall is to bring all these state agency people together in a room, because they don't know each other and they don't know what they're working on. And so really just trying to form critical masses all over. We have now an operations committee in CRAB, which, Finger Lakes reuse is heavily represented there, but it turns out almost every single region has numerous organizations and local governments who are trying to open reuse facilities, but they didn't know it. So really this network has allowed us to talk to each other and to learn from each other. And there's always someone who knows someone who we can reach out to. And so that to me is really the overarching thing that has worked wonders for New York State over the past few years.
I have to agree with Gretchen. I have learned so much from the women on this panel. I'm so grateful for all of you, as well as Timothy Hood, who we also got inspiration from the Bay Area Deconstruction Work Group. But I just learned more today sitting here, honestly, on this panel, and we've been talking fairly regularly. So, our deconstruction work group, we've cast the net really wide. We've invited as many people in who are interested, and also knowing that we're not the subject matter experts. So when I look over at Kristen Fritsch here, who's from Massachusetts, and as an architect, she's on our plans, part of our planning and development, and there are several other folks here, Michael Orban, I don't know if he's in the room, but that have helped us to learn, like, what are some of the key things here so that we can understand what the policy levers are, at least from our perspective, and what some of the needs are out there. We have private sector folks involved, we have nonprofits, we have experts in the field, we have academia. I see Barbara, I think, is that Barbara too? We have Barbara Bachelon, who's a consultant for Mass DEP right now. We're also doing an in-person workshop this fall, which I didn't know New York was as well, with go figure. So we are doing an in-person workshop and bringing the stakeholders together with Barbara's guidance, for expert guidance in that space. I'll say really briefly, a couple of the other agencies, because of this umbrella and network, we've learned about their enthusiasm to do so much more. So our Department of Conservation and Recreation, which is really our state parks in Massachusetts, they came to one of our deconstruction meetings, so excited. They have so many buildings on their properties, and they have hundreds of thousands of acres of property. And they have timbers that are 100+ years old, which you can't replace them. So they're very enthusiastic, and now working with some technical assistance folks that we've connected them with to capture the lumber, store it. That's their idea, to store it, be able to reuse it back on those properties or similar properties, because they're kind of irreplaceable materials. There are also folks in another sister agency that oversees the state buildings that are doing a pilot right now where they're deconstructing one. They have two buildings that are practically identical, and I guess one is being deconstructed and one is they're getting proposals, and one would be demoed. It hasn't happened yet, but they want to see it kind of blind, like what would be the difference in cost and what would the opportunity be. So, and it's snowballing. It's very exciting. The networking really matters. I mean, the grants help too, but I think it's such a big mosaic of individuals that participate in this space. So we're learning, we want to connect and try and grow this.
You both, other questions?
Ladies, if you, within the bounds of physics, have one thing, pie in the sky, program, funding, law, regulation, if you could have like your wildest dream in 20 years, what would it be? In this space.
I'll go first. Easy. I want Cal Recycle to be called Cal Reuse.
I would have cross-training, so all the tech and vocational schools, if they're teaching any kind of building skills, they also have to teach deconstruction and design for review.
We've seen some of our greatest successes happen because of funding. So the more people who feel supported, whether it's funding, technical assistance through the measures that I mentioned before, being able to leverage the energy and enthusiasm with those that are actually doing the work, that's what I would devote my time to.
Yeah, so this one's for, Kath.
Hard for me to choose one. I guess I would say if we could, if really connect the climate impacts of the materials that we're using and generating and disposing of, really understood that, then C&D, in my opinion, would probably rise to the very top. And we would put our resources fully behind addressing reduction first, before reuse, and then reuse and down the line.
I want to change my answer to that. Go ahead, Ellie.
This one's, mainly for Kathy, everybody, but, I mean, I feel because of the unique, situation in Massachusetts as compared to the other states, you mentioned that because Massachusetts is a commonwealth, that means, every town, does things differently. How have, you encouraged, collaboration in between different cities to deal with some of those unique situations brought on the commonwealth?
It's a great question. I wish we had highly functioning counties. I've spoken to some of my colleagues today and I asked them from other states, do you have highly functioning counties? Because I really wish we did. It would make things easier, frankly, because regional is the way to go. It's so sensible. So at least from my perspective on the municipal side of things, we have 8 regional coordinators that serve a population in different parts of the state. The demographics varies quite a bit from, mountains, rural, coastal, urban, quite varied. So we have 8 district coordinators and they get to know the cities and towns. They do one-on-one technical support and try to, again, it's all voluntary, but bring people together to do regional projects and inspire some of that. And we have grant funds that support it. We always promote regional because of the efficiencies with labor and with cost and all that.
Right, I think we have time for one more question before we fix that up.
Hi, I'm Alan. I'm from the city of Boston. Yeah, you know that our landfill capacity in Massachusetts is rapidly dwindling. Do you think that there will be a point where the cost of throwing things away changes the calculus here?
As though it shouldn't have already, right? Because we have some of the highest tipping fees in the country.
Yeah.
And now we're shipping it, we're putting it on rail and it's going to other states.
Alabama.
Yes, yes, it's a very difficult pill to swallow.
$20 a ton.
It's inexpensive and, certainly there are environmental concerns and EJ concerns associated with that as well from where I sit. I can say that there are no new projects in the pipeline for new disposal in Massachusetts. There's openness, but communities, I mean, I spoke to a group of mayors about a week or two ago, and, you know, they don't want it. They don't want the new capacity there, unfortunately. And the space is certainly an issue for a city like Boston. I don't know if I have an answer for you. I mean, I think the tip fees are very high. I'm seeing proposals for the next few years that are continue to be jaw-dropping. Will that incentivize it? Sometimes that'll be the tipping point to do things differently. Cost is gonna always be at the top of that decision-making matrix, right? I think it came up in one of the earlier sessions today. While there are many, many benefits to reuse and deconstruction, of course, that's why we're all here. You know, cost plays a key role.
I anticipate it will change here in Minnesota once we have the rulemaking promulgated. So that's why a lot of us have been working here in Minnesota to get ahead of things, working upstream. So we expect that the people who have already changed will continue, those that didn't want to, and will.
All right, that is the end of the session. A reminder that the member meeting is in this room, so if you are attending that, please stick around and join me in giving a warm round of applause for our wonderful panelists.